It is one of America's oldest unsolved mysteries, and it happened in our own backyard. What happened to the lost colony of Roanoke?
In the late summer of 1590, Governor John White arrived back at Roanoke Island, anxious to reunite with the English colonists he had left behind 3 years earlier. He had sailed from England in 1587, establishing a small settlement on the remote island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. Among the settlers were his daughter, Eleanor Dare, and her husband, Ananias, along with their infant daughter, Virginia Dare, who holds the distinction of being the first English child born in the New World. When White departed for England shortly after the colony's founding, it was with the intention of gathering more supplies and returning within a few months. But delays, mainly due to the Anglo-Spanish War, kept him away for 3 years. By the time he returned, the colony was gone. What he found instead was a dismantled settlement, abandoned buildings, and one cryptic clue carved into a tree, the word Croatoan. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The mystery of the lost Roanoke colony has since haunted historians, archaeologists, and amateur sleuths for over 4 centuries. No definitive answer has ever emerged, but theories abound, some plausible, some outlandish, all seeking to explain what befell the 115 Englishmen, women, and children who seemingly vanished without a trace. To understand the enigma, it helps to go back to the beginning. England, under Queen Elizabeth I, was eager to establish a foothold in the Americas, hoping to compete with Spanish power and expand its global influence. Sir Walter Raleigh, a favorite of the Queen, received a charter in 1584 to explore and colonize lands in the New World. The first attempt to establish a settlement at Roanoke occurred in 1585, but that mission faltered due to conflicts with indigenous peoples and a lack of resources. The colonists eventually returned to England with Sir Francis Drake. In 1587, a second attempt was made, this time under the leadership of John White. Unlike the earlier group, which had consisted mostly of soldiers, this group was composed of families, suggesting a long-term plan for settlement. Roanoke Island was chosen again as the site, and White made efforts to maintain relations with the native peoples. However, tensions still simmered. There were reports of previous hostile encounters between the English and local tribes, notably the Sabotage and Croatoan. When White sailed back to England for supplies, he expected to return quickly. Unfortunately, the war with Spain diverted much of the country's naval resources, and it wasn't until 1590 that he could finally arrange passage back to Roanoke. When he did return, he was greeted by a ghost town. The houses had been dismantled, not destroyed, but carefully taken apart. There were no signs of struggle, no graves or bodies, and no smoke rising from chimneys. The word Croatoan carved into a tree and the letters Suro etched into another were the only hints left behind. The word Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, home to a Native American tribe of the same name. At the time, White interpreted this as a sign that the colonists had moved there, possibly integrating with the friendly Croatoan people. He had instructed them before leaving that if they had to relocate, they should carve a sign into a tree, and if they were in danger, they should add a cross. The absence of a cross suggested a peaceful relocation. Yet bad weather prevented White and his crew from searching Croatoan Island, and he never returned to the region again. Thus, the mystery was born. Over the centuries, speculation has swirled. One of the most enduring theories is that the colonists were absorbed into local tribes, particularly the Croatoan or other neighboring groups. Some historians argue that cultural and linguistic traces in certain Native American communities support this idea. For instance, reports from later settlers and explorers in the 17th and 18th centuries spoke of Native Americans with European features, light eyes, fair hair, and knowledge of English customs. While intriguing, these accounts are anecdotal and difficult to verify. Archaeological evidence has added some weight to this theory. In the 1990s and early 2000s, excavations on Hatteras Island uncovered artifacts that appear to be of English origin, including a signet ring and a hilt from a rapier. While it's possible these items were obtained through trade rather than direct contact, their presence suggests at least some level of interaction between the English and the Croatoan. More recent digs have continued to turn up tantalizing clues. fragments of pottery, tools, and other European goods, but nothing definitively tied to the missing settlers themselves. Another theory proposes that the colonists tried to sail back to England on their own. This would have been a risky and desperate move. They lacked proper shipbuilding knowledge, and the materials necessary for such a voyage would have been scarce. Still, the notion of a self-rescue attempt is not entirely implausible. Perhaps the settlers, growing weary and anxious after years without support, decided to take their fate into their own hands. If they did launch a makeshift vessel, they may have perished at sea, their story lost beneath the waves. A darker possibility is that the colonists fell victim to violence, either from hostile tribes or internal strife. While no direct evidence of a massacre has been found, relations with local tribes were strained, especially with the Croatoan, who had previously attacked English settlers. It's conceivable that a conflict erupted, leading to the deaths of some or all the colonists. Yet again, the lack of physical remains challenges this theory. If there was bloodshed, where are the bodies? Where are the burned structures or defensive earthworks? There is also the idea of starvation or disease taking hold. The mid-Atlantic coast is home to a challenging environment. Hot, humid summers, mosquito-borne illnesses, and unpredictable storms. It's entirely possible that the colonists simply couldn't sustain themselves and either died off or were forced to disperse to survive. Some may have sought refuge with neighboring tribes, gradually assimilating over time. One of the more peculiar theories suggests Spanish involvement. At the time, Spain and England were bitter rivals, and Spain had a significant presence in the Americas, especially in Florida. Some historians have speculated that Spanish forces may have discovered and destroyed the Roanoke Colony as part of a larger effort to repel English expansion. While Spain certainly had the motivation and capability, there's little to no direct evidence linking them to Roanoke's disappearance. Spanish records from the period do not reference such an attack. In more recent years, technological advances have fueled renewed interest in the mystery. Satellite imagery, DNA testing, and ground-penetrating radar have been employed in various attempts to locate new evidence. One notable effort involves the Lost Colony and Hatteras Island Archaeology Project, which has focused on uncovering the remnants of English presence in Native American sites. Meanwhile, scholars at the First Colony Foundation have been exploring inland sites near the Chowan River, where an old map drawn by John White, called the La Virginia Pars map, contains a curious patch of paper, possibly covering up a fort symbol. Some believe this may point to a second settlement site, one that the colonists moved to after abandoning Roanoke Island. DNA testing holds particular promise, though it's fraught with challenges. Even if modern descendants of the Roanoke settlers or the Croatoan tribe could be identified, proving genetic lineage across such a span of time is complex. Yet researchers have not given up. Studies comparing DNA from people in eastern North Carolina, especially those with long-standing claims of descent from the lost colonists, continue to explore whether genetic traces of English ancestry persist in unexpected places. The story of Roanoke has become more than just a historical riddle. It has seeped into American folklore and culture. Over the years, it has inspired countless books, television shows, and movies. Its eerie, unresolved nature makes it a perfect canvas for fiction. From supernatural tales of ghosts and curses to speculative thrillers involving secret colonies and alien abductions, the Lost Colony has proved fertile ground for imagination. Yet beneath the mythology, the Roanoke mystery is a deeply human story about hope, struggle, fear, and survival. These were people who left behind everything they knew to start anew in an unknown land, driven by dreams of prosperity and freedom. That they vanished so completely speaks not only to the dangers they faced, but to the fragility of such dreams in the face of nature, conflict, and misfortune. The enduring question remains, what really happened? The answer may lie scattered in fragments beneath the soil of Hatteras Island or buried deep within the memories of oral traditions passed down over generations. It may be hidden in the brushstrokes of an old map or encoded in strands of DNA waiting to be matched. Or perhaps it will never be found, a secret lost to time like so many others. Still, the search continues. Every archaeological dig, every newly unearthed artifact, every reevaluation of 16th century documents adds a sliver of clarity to the fog. And with each discovery, the colonists of Roanoke become more than just ghosts of history. They become real again, pioneers of a bold experiment, caught in the turbulent currents of an age that changed the world. The power of the Roanoke mystery lies not just in its unanswered questions, but in the way it mirrors the broader colonial endeavor. It encapsulates the risks of ambition, the perils of miscommunication, and the resilience of people who dared to face the unknown. Whether the colonists found sanctuary among the Croatoan, succumbed to natural forces, or disappeared through some as yet unknown twist of fate, their story continues to fascinate because it touches on something eternal: the human desire to explore, to endure, and to leave a mark, even if that mark is a single word carved into a tree. While the initial facts of the Roanoke Colony's disappearance are well known, the ripple effects of its mystery have traveled far beyond the sandy shores of North Carolina. What makes the Roanoke case so uniquely persistent is not just its unanswered questions, but the many strands of consequence it spun, culturally, politically, and even ideologically. What might at first seem like a simple case of lost settlers reveals, upon deeper inspection, a story shaped by imperial ambition, indigenous resistance, evolving narratives, and centuries of reinterpretation. One of the most significant, yet often overlooked outcomes of the Roanoke mystery was its impact on England's approach to colonization. The failure of Roanoke had a chilling effect. The idea that over 100 English settlers could simply disappear without a trace was more than a logistical or military failure. It was a psychological one. It called into question England's ability to establish itself in the New World. This doubt slowed colonial ambitions for nearly 2 decades. Not until 1607, with the founding of Jamestown in Virginia, did England make another serious attempt. Even then, Roanoke haunted the efforts. The leaders of Jamestown were acutely aware of the precariousness of their situation. The new settlement was built with greater attention to defense and with clearer structures for governance and supply. Lessons learned from the unknown fate of those who came before. The psychological burden of Roanoke also had an effect on public perception back in England. At a time when printed pamphlets and sensational news reports were gaining traction as forms of mass communication, Roanoke became a cautionary tale. Rather than acting as an encouraging story of English ambition, it became a grim parable. Early writings speculated about betrayal, savagery, divine punishment, or even witchcraft. These accounts often reflected England's cultural anxieties, especially fears about the moral and spiritual hazards of venturing into untamed lands. For some religious writers, the failure of Roanoke symbolized the dangers of pride or of entering regions not yet prepared by God. On the other side of the Atlantic, the Roanoke settlers' disappearance likely had consequences among the indigenous peoples, too. The arrival of Europeans was already a destabilizing force, bringing new technologies, trade goods, and diseases, but also suspicion and conflict. The fate of the Roanoke settlers, especially if they did assimilate into local tribes, would have introduced new cultural and political dynamics. A group of English colonists joining a native community, willingly or not, would have altered tribal relationships and possibly created factions among different groups. Some tribes might have seen the colonists as useful allies or tools. Others might have viewed them as dangerous infiltrators. Linguistically and culturally, these hypothetical integrations could have seeded lasting changes. There are some suggestions that the language patterns of certain tribes in later years bore faint echoes of English, though this is debated. What is clear, however, is that the mere possibility of European integration blurred the once clear lines between settler and native. In this regard, Roanoke might be one of the earliest examples of cultural hybridity in North America. Rather than being wholly eradicated or wholly dominant, it's plausible the English presence melded, quietly, invisibly, into the cultures already thriving in the region. Roanoke's legacy also extends into the domain of American mythology. As the centuries passed, the story of the lost colony became increasingly romanticized. By the 19th century, it was no longer just a historical oddity. It was a symbol of national intrigue and a metaphor for the unknown possibilities of America. Poets, playwrights, and novelists seized upon Virginia Dare in particular, transforming her from a historical infant into a kind of spectral figure, a pure, innocent emblem of vanished potential. In some iterations, she becomes a ghostly guardian of the American wilderness. In others, she is tragically absorbed into native culture, her identity lost forever, the White Doe legend. Perhaps the most famous tale involving Virginia Dare tells of her being transformed into a white deer by a native shaman, cursed to wander the forest of North Carolina for eternity. This myth, entirely invented long after the fact, reveals how deeply Roanoke seeped into the subconscious of a growing nation. The colony's fate had become less a question of history than a story of longing, of transformation, and of erasure. Modern scholarship, however, tends to resist such romanticization. The trend over the last few decades has been to approach Roanoke with scientific rigor, separating fact from myth and data from drama. Archaeologists now use cutting-edge technologies, including LiDAR scanning, isotope analysis, and soil chemistry tests, to trace even the faintest signs of colonial presence. These methods have shifted the focus from the island of Roanoke itself to wider swaths of territory stretching into the mainland interior. Rather than assuming a single settlement or sudden disappearance, researchers now explore the possibility of multiple dispersals, small groups of settlers moving inland, joining different tribes, or forming isolated outposts that faded over time. This hypothesis has been strengthened by evidence suggesting pre-existing knowledge among the colonists of potential inland refugees. The 1585 and 1586 explorations under Ralph Lane and Thomas Harriot mapped out areas around the Chowan and Roanoke rivers. When John White departed in 1587, he left the settlers with both maps and directions to friendly native groups further west. If the colony fragmented and attempted to follow those routes, it's plausible they ended up in several separate locations, none of which left a definitive trail. Another avenue of inquiry involves climate. Recent paleoclimatological studies, examining tree rings and sediment layers, have shown that the Roanoke region experienced a severe drought between 1587 and 1589, one of the worst in centuries. This would have dramatically impacted local agriculture, fishing, and fresh water supplies. For a group of settlers already lacking in resources and facing intermittent hostility from native populations, such a drought could have been devastating. The environmental pressure may have forced the colonists to seek help from indigenous neighbors or to relocate in search of more sustainable conditions. It's yet another dimension of the mystery, one that grounds it firmly in the real, brutal challenges of colonial survival. In examining the broader consequences of Roanoke's disappearance, it becomes clear how tightly the mystery is intertwined with themes of erasure and record-keeping. One of the most frustrating aspects for historians is the sheer lack of documentation. John White's accounts, while detailed in parts, are not exhaustive. English records from the period are incomplete, often biased, and sometimes intentionally vague due to political concerns or reputational damage. The Spanish, though intensely curious about English movements in the New World, likewise left limited commentary. Even more crucially, the voices of the native peoples, those most likely to have known the fate of the colonists, were never recorded directly. Instead, their knowledge was filtered through translators, missionaries, and colonial officials, all of whom brought their own interpretations and biases. As such, vital pieces of information may have been misunderstood, lost, or ignored entirely. This absence of first-hand Indigenous narrative has left a lopsided historical record, one that scholars continue to try and rebalance. In more recent decades, Indigenous perspectives have become a more integral part of the research surrounding Roanoke. Native historians and community leaders from tribes in North Carolina, particularly the Lumbee and Hatteras peoples, have added oral histories and traditional knowledge to the ongoing conversation. These stories often tell of white ancestors, ancient alliances, and cultural blending. While difficult to verify by Western academic standards, these accounts offer a perspective rooted not in disappearance, but in endurance and transformation. One striking example involves the Lumbee tribe, whose members have long claimed descent from the lost colonists. Their oral traditions, physical appearance, and even linguistic traits have been cited as possible evidence of this ancestry. Though some anthropologists remain skeptical, DNA testing has been proposed as a potential method to investigate these connections further. If ever confirmed, such a discovery would not only solve the mystery, but also reframe it, not as a tale of loss, but as one of unexpected continuity. Outside of academic circles, Roanoke has maintained its place in popular culture. From science fiction to horror, It has been reimagined in countless ways. The 2016 season of American Horror Story, subtitled Roanoke, capitalized on the eerie ambiguity of the settlement's disappearance. The show portrayed supernatural forces as the cause, drawing on both real-world history and invented legends. Though wildly fictionalized, such portrayals reflect the enduring cultural power of the story. It taps into primal fears, of isolation, of being forgotten, and of confronting the unknown without rescue. That psychological undercurrent may explain why the Roanoke mystery persists when other colonial failures have faded into obscurity. The Jamestown settlers, too, suffered horrific mortality rates. By some estimates, over 80% died in the early years. Yet their story is remembered as a tale of eventual triumph. Roanoke, by contrast, offers no closure. It ends not in survival or defeat, but in silence. That silence invites endless interpretation. Educational programs and historical reenactments in North Carolina have embraced Roanoke's legacy. At the Fort Raleigh National Historic Site on Roanoke Island, visitors can explore exhibits that blend archaeological discovery with interactive media. Nearby, the long-running outdoor drama, The Lost Colony, stages nightly performances that mix history with theatrical imagination. First performed in 1937 and attended by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the play has become a cultural institution, performed by generations of actors, some of whom went on to national fame. It tells the story of the settlers' struggle and disappearance, offering one possible ending while acknowledging the mystery at its heart. For the communities surrounding Roanoke Island, the mystery is more than a story. It's a legacy woven into local identity. Towns, schools, and festivals bear the names of figures like Virginia Dare and John White. Tourism thrives on the enigma, and local lore is thick with tales of ghostly sightings, buried relics, and hidden clues. Whether based on fact or fiction, these stories bind generations together in a shared sense of wonder. As the 21st century progresses, the mystery may be approaching a turning point. Advances in data analysis, AI-assisted archaeological surveys, and deeper collaboration with descendant communities offer the potential for new revelations. Yet, even if definitive proof of the colonists' fate emerges, a burial site, a settlement trace, a document, or DNA match, it's unlikely to erase the mystique entirely. Roanoke has become more than a historical puzzle. It's a mirror reflecting our own questions about belonging, identity, and the passage of time. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Roanoke's disappearance? Any theories you believe happened there? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.